Hello, good evening, and welcome to the TNT show, The Nation Talks. I'm John Drummond, and I'm your host for the next 60 minutes. And they'll be exciting minutes. They'll be very different minutes. Many of you who enjoy the show, and we've now done over 50, will recognize there is a set format. But once in a while, we like to change things around. And I'll tell you more about that in a second. You know, it's been another great day for British democracy, a standout day. Today we learned from Prime Minister Johnson that greed is good. Think about that. Greed is good. That's what he said. And it's because greed is good that we've all had vaccinations. Who knew? See, you thought it was AstraZeneca. You thought it was a lab in Oxford. No, these people weren't voted. They weren't motivated by the common good. Apparently, they were motivated by greed. I think that will be a surprise to many of the folks who developed the vaccine. Oh, by the way, he also said that we ought to appreciate the sheer might of the UK. Now, I'm sorely tempted to regard that as a spoonerism. and you all know what a spoonerism is, where you take the first two letters of the second word and transpose them with the first word. So he's talking about that the UK has sheer might. Think about it. Okay, thanks for joining us this evening. We have yet, as we always do, another great guest this evening, and I'm really excited that she's able to join us. Tonight, the TNT show welcomes Sheena Wellington, and we'll be talking about Dundee and singing and so much else besides. And we're taking your questions live. So this show is not only free, it's live. Take full advantage. You see the what's on data on the screen. You can contact us there with your questions or your comments for Sheena, and we'll try and cover as many as we possibly can. We've got 60 minutes coming up very soon. Go to the What's On guide if you want to contribute. So, the Nation Talks. And tonight, the Nation talks to Sheena Wellington. Sheena, how are you coping with the pandemic?
Well, not too badly, John, actually, and it's very nice to be here, and thank you very much for asking me. I've actually been busy, which, people talk about, oh, I'm bored with a lockdown. No chance would be a fine thing, because way back last year, even before the lockdown had been announced, I had got embroiled in helping to set up the Dundee Together food bank and phone line. And that was very, very busy for a number of months because this came as such a shock. People weren't really prepared. There weren't big stocks of food everywhere to dish out. It was difficult times, and of course it takes forever to set up a bank account at the best of times, but during a pandemic it's even worse. So in my capacity as secretary of the City Centre and Harbour Community Council, I was we were taking in money for the food bank and dishing it out, and I was sending people for messages, and I had people standing in the pouring rain outside supermarkets trying to get food for shielding people who had to be sent home from hospital, but who didn't have anything in the house. And of course, the council hadn't got around to
Oh my.
acquiring that.
So
So,
they had nothing in the house to eat?
well, quite often they didn't, not the stuff they could eat. They
Yeah.
were getting sent home and they'd maybe had stomach operations
Oh
or
my.
other operations, and they just didn't have the right food. And we got lists of the food and sent people out to buy it until things settled down. Of course, it then became a very good citywide and into the surrounding countryside, a very, very good food insecurity network, which is still going strong. I kind of stood
That's
back from it when they did away with the phone line and got on with other things.
yeah.
It wasn't any quieter, though. That was the thing.
That seems to sort of underscore the reputation of Dundee as being a town, a city with a strong community ethos, where people support each other.
Oh, yeah, it was amazing the amount of support that we did get. I mean, we sent out an SOS one night. There was a bairn who was autistic and wouldn't eat his tea unless he had a piece and strawberry jam first. and there was no strawberry jam to be got anywhere. And we sort of sent out on the local radio stations and on social media and said, "Has anybody got strawberry jam?" And we were inundated with jars of strawberry jam. So he and the family were fine for the entire pandemic, which is great.
It's a good place to get your strawberry jam from. There's loads of, you know, pick your own and places of that round about Dundee and Angus, etc. I've been there a bunch of times doing that.
Sorry, I've got a bit of a cough.
That's okay. Tell us about Sheena Wellington. You were born in Dundee, right?
I was born in Dundee, doing the tune in Temple Lane, which alas is now no more, although a bit of the Dundee Rep stands on it, which is rather nice. And I grew up in the city, went to school, went to Blackness Primary School, and then went to Harris Academy, and went on to Dundee College of Education, but I had to leave there because my father was ill and I wasn't able to complete my training. And then I decided that I was looking for adventure or something, and I decided to join the Women's Royal Naval Service. And I quite intended to make a career of it because my father had been in the Navy and I liked boats, although in those days you didn't get on boats if you were a lassie. And I was attached to the Fleet Air Arm. The trade that I had was Fleet Air Arm, so I did interesting things like flying in helicopters, not flying helicopters, but flying in helicopters from hither beyond. And it was highly entertaining, but then I met my fate. I bumped into this very nice sailor, and I'm still with him. That's 55 years later. We just had
Really?
our wedding anniversary,
Congratulations.
54th, yeah. So that was that bit. And he was still in the Navy, of course, so we travelled around Scotland and England. We were stationed at Lossiemouth, then we were stationed in Somerset, then we were stationed at RAF Leuchars, and then we went back to Southampton, which is actually Malcolm's hometown. And we decided that we'd open a guest house. So we moved up to St Andrews. All of this time I had been going into local folk clubs and singing. I wasn't doing it professionally, but I was doing it just because I enjoyed it. And it was always a good way to sort of make friends in a new place. If you went to the local folk club and got up and did a turn, as we say in Dundee, you made friends and you got to know people. And it wasn't until we come back to St Andrews and we were actually, our guest house was in North Street, just round the corner from the St Andrews Golf Hotel, which is where the folk club was at that particular time. So once we'd got over the first shock of having to get up at heaven knows what time of day to feed people that were going out to play a round of golf at stupid o'clock and things like that, I decided I'd nip round to the local folk club. The next thing I knew, I was a resident singer there. I was one of the compeers, and I was petitioning Radio Tay to have a folk programme. They'd had one with Cilla Fisher, and they'd done away with that, so I organised petitions and all the rest of it. And they said, well, if you're that keen, come and do it. So I got a 6-week offer. Do it for 6 weeks, they said. And I think it was 8 years later I left the building. Happenstance, these things happen, it just comes
When
along.
did you first feel that you were a talented singer? Was that very early on, or did that come later?
I'm not sure yet if I feel that I'm a talented singer, but apparently the first time I ever sang in public was a diddling competition in the drill hall in Artillery Lane in Dundee, which is just round the corner from where I was born. And my father was very good. My father was very musical with a beautiful voice and all the rest of it. My mother, who died when I was very young, was at that time in Ashludy Sanatorium. So he took me with him, obviously, took us with him because we thought we would enjoy it.
Yeah.
And at the interval, they were calling for people to go up and sing while the judges made their decision and all the rest of it. And of course, and me go and sing, me sing, me sing. So they put me up on the stage, thinking that, or the platform, it wasn't really a stage, apparently thinking I would sing something like Bala Bala Black Sheep or something like that. And I suddenly sang Beautiful Dreamer, which apparently had been what my mother sang me to sleep with.
Oh,
And
really?
I do not think I've ever publicly sung it since. But so that was always the family legend. I'd pushed myself onto a stage when I was 2 year old.
So then you eventually you pursued a singing career, which presumably involved touring around and
I
playing
made a
gigs in
record.
different
Yeah,
parts.
I made a record for Dougie MacLean. I met Dougie through the radio tape program and through Hamish Moore, who lived across the road from us in St Andrews. And Dougie says, "Well, I've got to record your voice. I've got to record your voice." I was doing clubs and doing the occasional festival then, and I made the first album, and then did the tours into various places. Toured America, went to Canada with the Vale of Apple Pipe Band, which is I like being lead singer in a pipe band. It's got a bit of class to it, I think. And it just suddenly took off. It was never planned. It was one of these things. I never actually planned to be a singer. I found myself once in the year 2000 at the folk songs of the two millennia in Nanning, not Nanking, Nanning,
Mm.
in Guangxi province in China. And I was about 160 feet up this structure, which had only been put up 3 days before, singing. And we stayed up. We had to stay up there for the whole time once we'd got up. And when they said to me, "You have to go up there, you will be on the stage there," and I thought, "Oh, that's nice. Where's the lift or whatever?" And they said, "No, there's no lift." And I had to climb. So I'm climbing up this ladder in the long frock and the whole bit, you know. And it was really very interesting because the very hospitable people, the Chinese and the people that we were, it was artists from all over the world, and it was really good fun, and they were awfully nice and the rest of it. But of course, the Chinese have got a passion for fireworks, and you can't have an event without fireworks, which would have been lovely. I would have quite enjoyed sitting down there watching the fireworks. Unfortunately, I was right. We were right in the middle of the firework display, and sort of rockets shooting about your head, and it was great. It was good fun. Sometimes,
Now,
yeah.
people think that touring is glamorous. How
It
would you describe touring?
has its moments. There are, you meet people that you wouldn't have met. You get to places that you would not have got to just if you weren't doing what you were doing. But it has its hairy moments as well. One of the things is that unless you're in the Beyonce class and you're traveling by an entourage of thousands, everybody that's actually in the group has got to have one task. Mine was always the laundry, and everybody says, "Oh, that's terrible. They made the woman do the no." Actually, the woman decided she was doing the laundry because you meet nice people when you're standing at a coin-operated machine in a motel, or you're actually going out to laundramas and things like that in foreign countries. You do meet very interesting people. But there was one occasion when it was a wee bit less than fun. We were in Seattle and I was touring with Dougie MacLean and um, who else was there? Oh, Dave Allison, that group, Hamish. Um, And got to Seattle, which was lovely, but by that time we really needed to get washing done because we'd been staying in hotels. We were traveling with Fiona Ritchie and it was all public broadcasting. So local hotels were sponsoring our stay. We were staying in these very posh hotels, which did not have coin-operated washing machines, but had laundry services. And you look at the price of the laundry service and you think, $5 to wash a butt. Wait, where's the nearest laundry? And they did actually, they were very kind. They got this big station, this big estate car kind of thing down, and I put the suitcase with everybody's washing in it, and we set off. And unfortunately, the suitcase slid out the back, and of course, I jumped over the back of the car. I was a lot younger then. Grabbed it by the suitcase by the handle and slid right out the back of the car with my arm scream. I mean, I must have been screaming because I could feel my arm coming out its socket, and ended up on the ground. And this very fast-thinking lorry driver that was behind us managed to stop before he ran over me. Otherwise, I would have been strawberry jam in Seattle. and I had to get carted to the emergency room, and I had to go on stage at night. I was black and blue from head to foot. I had a dislocated shoulder. I'd managed to skin my nose, and it had to be made up very carefully so that didn't show because we were getting photographed and things. It has its moments. It has its moments. Yeah.
Now you have a whole list of certificates and honours. I mean, I'm just going to tell people about a few of them. Stop me if this becomes embarrassing, but you have a doctorate at St Andrews and Dundee. You have the Royal Scottish Academy of Music and Drama, a doctorate from them too. The Heritage of Scotland Award for Outstanding Contribution to Scotland's Culture.
I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed. It's enough.
Oh no, I've only scratched the surface. And you've got the coveted Herald Archangel for Edinburgh International Festival series of traditional song programs. You're going to have to explain this one, which was called Work, Sex, and Drink.
Well, the Edinburgh Festival, International Festival, thought that was what our songs were all about. And we managed to disabuse them of the notion, but they liked the title, so we were kind of stuck with it. And I wasn't the only one. There were several of us there. Christine McHugh and Ian MacDonald, the piper, were involved in that one. I'm not quite sure why I ended up with the Herald Archangel. I think I wonder anybody else was speaking to me by that time. But it was just a way of showing just how varied and interesting and how much about the human condition, about the nature. It's not all about battles and breastbeating and all the rest of it. It's not all about soapy romances. But the songs of the people are actually the songs of the people. They're about the issues that matter to them. That's why we have got so many good work songs. And of course, sex always sells. I think that was their idea. They thought, put that in the title and people will expect to get something dramatic on stage.
You're absolutely right. Sex always sells. I mean, I was just interested in the order. Not work, drink, and sex, but work, sex, and drink.
It was, that was the way they saw it, I suppose.
I understand. And you, Sheena, sparing your blushes again, you were the first woman in the 204-year history of the Greenock Burns Club to give the immortal memory.
I was actually. I was immensely honoured because Greenock Burns Club is the mother club, It's huge and ancient and all the rest of it. It was an incredible honour. And they make you honorary vice president or honorary president for the year. And I still actually wear my little badge, which I got particularly if I'm doing a Burns concert. I always wear that, and I always give greetings from Greenock to the world.
I think that should be somewhere in the history of women's achievements, that fact ought to figure somewhere, that you broke the mold after 204 years.
Yes.
That's noteworthy. That's something that people should know about, it seems to me. And of course, in July 1999, you gave the rendition of A Man's a Man for All That at the opening of this Scottish Parliament. Or as Winnie Young would have said, the reopening of the Scottish Parliament. How did that come about?
Well, it was kind of odd. Apparently, there was a panel of people deciding what the programme was going to be and who was going to be in it and all the rest of it. And a civil servant whose name escapes me, which I feel dreadful about, said that she suggested A Man's a Man for All That and thought that it should be a woman singing it and perhaps I would be good. The then head of the Scottish Arts Council, Shona Reid, was on the... Actually, she's now Dame Shona Reid. I do beg her pardon. I've met her several times since she got her damehood, and I've never remembered once to call her your dameship or whatever you call people with damehoods. But she sort of thought, this is quite a good idea. And she phoned Shona Irvine, who at that time was actually in the literature department in the Scottish Arts Council, but knew a great deal about traditional music. And she said they would like to have A Man's a Man for All That, but they would like a woman to sing it who do you think it should be? And Shona said, Sheena Wellington. And Shona Reid said, yes, that's what I thought as well. So we'll just put it forward. And I got the phone call. I was actually touring. Well, I wasn't touring. I was going around with Jean Urquhart, who was standing as a list member in the Highlands and Islands at that time. And she had taken a wee house and, she'd rented a house in Wick. And we went back there for lunch. And this was before everybody had a mobile phone. And, but the phone rang when we were sitting having lunch, and it was my husband. And he said, they want you to sing at the opening. And several of my friends had already said they were doing the Princess Street Gardens, they were doing something in the evening, they were doing other things over the day. And I said, oh, that'll be nice. Whereabouts? He said, no, I mean, they actually want you to sing in the chamber with the Queen and everybody and all the MSPs. And I dropped the phone. And apparently went white, and Jean picked up the phone and said, what on earth have you said to her? So I had to keep it quiet. And of course it leaked out because everything leaks out. And there was the usual suspects all thought it was outrageous I was singing this in front of the Queen, not realising or not thinking, of course, that before I was even asked, never mind anything else, the programme had been run past Her Majesty. And Her Majesty had approved it. She thought it was it was the right song for the day, and it was a good idea to have a woman singing it, and that was it. So that was how it came about. It was ludicrous. It's the only time I've actually really been bothered with the paparazzi. They were jumping out behind the hedge and all the rest of it. Oh, hey, wait a minute! I was working for Fife at the moment as traditional arts officer, and they were kind of round about the office. And nobody could get in or out. It was a carry on, yes. But
would you mind very much when we close in about just over half an hour's time, maybe at 5 to 8, to sing us out with A Man's a Man?
Yeah. It has become my trademark, and I realised what a moment it was, and I didn't realise until I was outside, because I finished. Well, but when the ceremony was over, and I'd been so nervous beforehand, the ceremony was over, and I was sort of had all these MSPs come charging up the stairs and leaping on me, and the ones that I knew, the ones that I didn't know, etc. But it was walking down the road. There's all these people shouting, Sheena, would you sign my flag? Would you kiss the bairn? And all this kind of thing. I turned round to Malcolm, who's got a lot to put up with, I have to say, and said to him, God, there must be a lot of people here we know. And he said, Sheena, they have just seen you on the giant screens. You are still even wearing the same dress. I can still get into that outfit, by the way. I'm quite proud of that. But no, it was a moment. It was a moment. It was a very proud moment because my father all his life wanted Scotland to be, well, it was home rule, they used to call it in those days. Home rule. He signed the covenant, all that kind of thing. Home rule, and his brothers were all home rulers, and in their later years, they were for independence, So it was that special moment of, and everybody says you've become part of history, and you think
it's true.
It's
is true.
A wee bit daunting. And of course, when we got home, my son, my late son, he was a young, and they'd had to take the phone off the hook because everybody was phoning them, and the flowers had already started to arrive before we got home. We were living in Fife at the time. And I was absolutely, the house was chock-a-block with flowers. I was handing them out to all the neighbours. I was borrowing vases. It was absolutely brilliant. But what I loved about it was one of my neighbours, an old Fifer, come over for a cup of tea, as they do. And she walked round and she looked at the flowers and she looked at all the hundreds of cards and all the rest of it. And she said, it's just a good job you're our all to hae your head turned. It's what I love about being Scottish, because nobody lets you get above yourself, you know. And the other one was when I was back in Dundee. I'd come over probably for messages or something like that, and I bumped into an old neighbour that used to pal about with when we were kids together. Frida's just about my age, and she said, "Oh, my, I saw you on the I was so proud. You look great. You sounded. Oh, it was wonderful. It was wonderful. Of course, I didn't like your frock." And I said, "All right." I said, "But as I said to Rab, who's our man, as I said to Rab, when your Sheena's build, it's really hard to get something that's going to look nice."
Oh my! Only in Scotland.
Only in Scotland.
That's the equivalent of I knew his father.
It
Yeah.
is. Well, it's nice that people think, you know, if people still think that you can be spoke to. I'd hate to
Yeah.
be one of these people that people didn't come near, you know.
Yeah. I think maybe that's the big benefit of necessity. You're part of the community.
Mm-hmm.
I think particularly a country like Scotland, where there's a highly developed community sense, a sense of people being in it all together in some way, shape, or fashion. It varies, obviously, from place to place and across other features and factors. But it does seem to be a general view that people feel close. I mean, one of the interesting experiences I always found being in Glasgow was you could walk up to anyone and say, "Can you direct me to so and so?" And they never do. They say, "I'll take you there."
Yeah. They tend to do that in Dundee as well. Or
Yeah.
they really do confuse you and say, right, just turn that way, head even for it until you get to the pub, and turn right. And actually, it's fine for me, but it must be awfully confusing for visitors to the city.
Yeah.
We're all trying to be good about that, because we're now actually are inviting people to come to well, not right at this precise moment, but we are inviting people to come and see just what we have in Dundee.
Yeah, and it's good. You've got a lot in Dundee.
We have a
It's one of my favourite places to visit. Um, but the point I was going to make about approachability is that if you did the same thing in London, the likelihood is that the person you're speaking to would take 2 steps back and they'd be concerned about what your actual purpose was in asking the question, how do I get to such and such? And it's just the nature of different cities, I guess, as much as anything else. But you can go to almost any place in Scotland and folks will try and help you out as best they can. That's just it's a general feature here, it seems to me.
I think it's just the way we were brought up. I
Yeah,
think just
I
that's
think
it.
that's a large part of it.
Uh-huh.
So we've got some questions and comments. Ruth has said that she says my dad was a lovely singer, but mum was tone deaf. But she did try awfully hard, bless her.
I am of the opinion that very few people are totally tone deaf.
Oh
I
really?
have worked with people who think they're tone deaf, and I've usually managed to get a tune out of them, not necessarily a beautiful sound or anything like that, but you, it can be done. It can be quite hard work, but it can be done. The number of people I remember once being at a lecture where the lecturer said the number of people who are totally percentage wise, you know, on the sort of bell curve, who are totally tone deaf is much smaller than the number of people who have perfect pitch. And
Oh
his theory
really?
was that tone deafness was a great disadvantage when you were a hunter gatherer, because you could not tell the difference between the note or even the sound or the breathing or of a saber-toothed, no, maybe they didn't have saber-toothed tigers, you know what I mean, of an aggressive animal
A predator. Yeah.
things might eat, you know.
Yeah.
And I thought that's an interesting. It was an interesting thought. But,
Mm.
mm,
Let's talk politics for a second.
mm,
Uh, you're a member of the SNP, right?
I am indeed.
Yeah.
Wallerstown branch.
Wallerstown branch.
And
Uh,
city liaison team. Mm.
and what's your take on the prospects for the election on May 6th?
I remain hopeful about the prospects. I mean, I think we're obviously going to be the biggest part, or at least I expect us to be the biggest party. And I think there's a possibility that we will have an absolute majority, which would be very useful because um, them doing by do not understand the system that we have here. They do not realise quite what a phenomenon it is to have 60 or 61 constituency seats in this parliament. I mean, they don't see the difference between the constituency and the list. And they don't realise that we've got an awful lot of Tories in the place that have never been elected to anything in their entire cream puff. So I'm hopeful, and I think if we need to put our heads down, it's going to be difficult because you can't, I mean, it's difficult to campaign in a pandemic. We may be able to go and put leaflets through people's doors. We have to do a lot of work on social media. We have to talk to our friends and family, those of them who are not with us already. And we really do have to try to counter the propaganda. And there's no other word for it. The propaganda which is getting battered at us from all directions. I mean, they cannot. I didn't expect newspapers like the Daily Depress and things like that to actually tell a story the right way anyway. But it's when you get organs of the media which should be telling the story correctly, and they still manage to distort it. They still manage to twist it. That's
What's
very
what,
difficult to.
yeah, I mean, the reality is that, well, the best of my recollection about the Express readership it is a somewhat ancient readership.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're talking 60 and above, perhaps, not solely, but predominantly an older readership in Scotland. That would probably apply to some of the other mainstream media too, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think that is true, and they're actually quite difficult to reach. There are people like of my age, around and about, quite a lot of my friends I chat to on Zoom, because Zoom has been your friend during this thing, are with it and they're able to see, they read a lot of things.
Mm.
They didn't just read one newspaper and look at the BBC. But there are so many people who do. It's very. I mean, I'm not sure how we're going to do it. I think the only thing we can do is billboards everywhere, but then people are not going out. It is difficult. It just means that all of us who want independence have got to be single-minded. We have got to be single-minded. I mean, I don't care whether you like anybody or you didn't like anybody or you like this one, or even if you didn't like the person that you're going out to vote for. That is not the point. We really need to get the majority. We need to get the vote out and we need to get an SNP majority.
Now, in the face of it, Sheena, the casual observer could be forgiven for thinking that's a fairly straightforward process, surely, because the SNP, the membership of the SNP is so hugely greater than any of the other parties. I mean, my impression, and it's only an impression, but I have a feeling that the SNP membership is almost the same as the Labour membership across the entire UK. I mean, it's huge. I mean, you're a member of a very large organisation. So the casual observer might look at that and say, oh, come on, Sheena, it must be awfully straightforward. If every member of that huge organisation speaks to one other person, either on Zoom or on the phone or whatever,
Yeah,
that
and
presumably
persuades them.
would be
Yeah,
one of the most powerful things that you could do.
I'm not sure that. I mean, it's just not as easy as that. We need to try. I mean, talking to some of my friends, you think, good grief, were they actually at school with me? And if so, why didn't they learn anything? That just they'll say,
Well,
I'm not voting SNP because you try to tell them the facts about the pension. You try to tell them the facts about the export potential, the actual export and the potential for that and all the rest of it. And they say, yeah, but that's not what the paper says. You feel like going, shut up. Not that I would ever advocate violence, but you really sometimes think, oh, God. Um,
but don't you find that sometimes people say that simply to get a reaction from you?
well, so, I suppose sometimes, but I think some of the older generation. I mean, my husband, the lovely Malcolm, who is even more fanatical for independence than I am myself, by the way, though he was born and brought up in Hampshire. Um, he reckons he's gotten to the stage because he was talking to or reading a bit to some older persons. He said, I'm beginning to think we should just stop everybody over 70 voting. And I said, well, you realise that would deny me a vote and you a vote, Jean Freeman a vote. You can't be doing that kind
Yeah,
of thing. You
yeah,
can't get carried away. I could just
uh,
imagine Winnie Ewan's reaction to that.
yeah. I can imagine. Having said that, I mean, to some degree, there's some real uh, truth in what he says and what Malcolm says, because if you think of, let's assume that the opinion polls are reasonably accurate, and what they would suggest, certainly the most recent opinion polls based on the research done by a right-wing think tank, which was published this week, they looked at the motivation behind people's voting intentions, which is helpful because then you can look at their values. You can say how 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 much do you value this communitarian spirit that we were talking about. You can test all of these things because these are predictors of how their views might or might not change. And one of the things that it comes through quite clearly is that, and it's a real problem for unionism, is that their vote, their most solid vote, is terminal. Now people of a certain age are not going to be around forever, whereas the SNP and the Yes movement's biggest supporters are people 18 through to 30 or so.
Mm-hmm.
And now that extends to the people under 50, which didn't used to be the case. So what you're seeing there is a gradual movement of people into the older age group who have fairly strong views about independence and identify themselves as Scottish, which is a predictor, as opposed to Scottish and British, which would be the characterization that most people over 60 would accept, whereas people under that age would either say, I'm either Scottish or British primarily. Let's take a few questions as we go along, if I may. Angus is saying, how do you feel about the strategy of splitting the vote? SNP 1 and some other party, pro-independence party 2. What's your take on that?
Well, I'm actually in the SNP 1 and 2 camp for the simple reason that I would like to give my second vote to the Greens. Actually, there are some other pro-independence parties that have policies that I would agree with, but I think we'll just wait for them until we've got independence and then we'll do it, because we really do. I'm not sure that we can risk. I think to a certain extent it depends where you are. I think there are places where the vote we might not get the constituency, so therefore voting SNP for your second vote is absolutely essential. There are things where the vote looks pretty solid and therefore you can afford to do something else. But the great danger of that, of course, is splitting the independence vote. There's one thing to be voting second for the Greens, or one of the other parties, if everybody does it. It's quite another thing if the vote splits 4 or 5 ways, and then we get Murdo Fraser. Actually, I think we're going to get Murdo Fraser anyway, because I think he's top of the list. Good grief. How the heck can that happen? That man's been there for 20 years, and nobody's ever voted him in. It's a shocking state of affairs.
Yes, on one level, I would agree with you. On another level, I think what the most recent discussion about the committee that met and announced its findings recently about the Scottish Government's conduct, I think what it showed very clearly is that there are a lot of political pygmies in the Scottish Parliament. I mean, I'm thinking particularly in the opposition ranks. I mean, some of the people who are sitting as MSPs, I'm not sure they would get a job doing anything else, quite frankly. I don't want to sound hypercritical here. I'm simply basing that upon a casual observation of their behaviour. I mean, why anyone, for example, sitting on a committee, having agreed in advance to its rules of conduct, which preclude releasing information to the media, goes ahead and does it anyway, and thinks that that's acceptable behaviour. It's just outrageous, frankly. And it suggests people of a fairly mean intellect, I have to say.
Yeah, I think there's something in that. But I think one of the things which is wrong, particularly with the opposition MSPs in the Scottish Parliament, is that they must well, it must seem to them that the future is actually quite hopeless, because it doesn't look as if they're going to be able to form a government after May. I mean, I am crossing all my fingers and everything else for that.
Yeah.
It doesn't look as if they are. It must be depressing. I mean, I tend to judge MSPs on whether they're good constituency people, in the same way that I judge MPs, because not everybody can be stellar. Not everybody can be a great orator. Not everybody can get up and ask a penetrating question in the chamber that reduces the First Minister to flinders and all the rest of it. But they can all be good constituency MPs. And actually, that is another thing that I do not like Ruth Davidson for, because according to all reports I have heard, she was not a good constituency MP. She did not even have constituency surgeries. Even before the pandemic, she didn't, which I think is outrageous. You should be out in your back end for that.
I think there's also, I think what the recent events have demonstrated is perhaps that the Scottish Parliament needs to pay a bit more attention to its own arrangements, which presumably would include what you've just described, i.e. that somebody being elected on the list actually has and fulfills, perhaps maybe they do have but don't fulfill them, responsibilities. But it's difficult to see how you can persuade people to do that if they know they're never going to be in power. I mean, it's just, it's a big ask, really, isn't it?
Well, it's a big ask, but on the other hand, why do you want to be in Parliament? I mean, apart from the salary, which is rather nice, if you have a sense of service, it's the same if you're a community councillor and we didn't even get any money. If you're in there because you want to make things better,
yeah,
that should be an end in itself. If you can get your own policies done, and you have to actually work as an elected person, whether you're elected by the constituency or on the list, you have to actually work as if what you're doing matters to your constituents and to the country at large. And you look at some of them and think, I bet you didn't even matter in your own household, never mind anything else.
Here's another question which you might like to ponder over, Sheena. Peter is saying, look, Brexit is hammering Scottish exports, and the mainstream media says nothing. Do you, Sheena, see an independent Scotland joining the EU or EFTA?
I would actually like an independent Scotland to look at what's on offer from both and take the best offer for Scotland. I mean, I was absolutely shattered when the Brexit vote came in. I just could not believe that that people could be so stupid. And unfortunately, we had a wee cruise booked right after that, and it was full of people, very nice people otherwise from England, who were all, well, most of them were thrilled to bits with Brexit. And they had one of these British evenings that they have on cruises, which we always avoid. And there were people wandering about the place wearing Union Jack suits. I mean, and Union Jack frocks. And you thought, what in the... I mean, all right, a nice tie with a saltire on it is one thing. A kilt, fine. A Union Jack suit? Give me peace. Bloody awful. Excuse my language. I'm sorry about that. I very rarely swear online, but it was the thought of it. I know, I think that's a very good question, Peter. I think I'm I'm tempted to say that EFTA gives you a bit more individual freedom as a country. The only thing is that you find that you do actually have to contribute to the EU without actually having any say. Although that's more apparent than real, because quite often Norway and other places, Iceland and Switzerland, are consulted about things because even though they're not, because they have that relationship. And I think the fact that we ended up with what's more or less no deal and has made an absolute burrach of so many. I mean, I could sit down and greet at the number of businesses that are going to the wall. The fishermen, the seafood, particularly the seafood, because they more or less realised they weren't even Brexit voters. A lot of them, they actually realised what an absolute mess it was all going to be and a disaster. But other businesses that are just finding themselves with their markets cut off and for what? So that we can have more nuclear warheads. Well, that's a good deal, that, isn't it?
Well, I mean, let's take a question from George Aitken. George says that he would think that celebrities that support independence would be a big help in promotion and make a big difference. What's your take on that?
Um, well, it wouldn't make me change my vote, but see, I think it is good when we have people who are doing good things in this country, who are noted for things in this country, and actually, preferably if they're living in this country, I have to say, um, come out for independence and say, yeah, we think we can do this. This is something that we should be doing. Why not? I mean, it's normalization. I saw that somewhere today. I think it must have been on Facebook. Somebody said not nationalism, normalism. I thought I like that. Yeah, countries are normally independent and make their own decisions. Yes, that's just exactly what I want.
I hesitate to ask you this question in the light of what you just said, but I need to ask it because somebody's asked it here, and I'm happy to ask it, frankly. What is your feeling about Johnson's edict that all public government buildings in England, Wales, and Scotland will have to fly the Union Jack?
I actually quite like the idea because I think if anything's going to get up our noses, it's forcible Union Jackery. I think they just, I mean, they all look so prim and stupid. Whenever you see the Tory ministers on there in their wee hooses, they've got a flag and a photo of the Queen. And I am absolutely certain sure before the days of Zoom and Microsoft Teams, they didn't have a Union Jack or a photo of the Queen on their wall. Um, I think it will annoy people. I think it's an outrage. I think having said for years that the nationalists are a bunch of flag waving nutters and all the rest of it, we do not wave the flags. And we wave flags on occasions when we're having a rally. We sometimes put them up on bridges so that people can toot and wave. Um, we put them on buildings for occasions and things like this. But this idea that Union Jacks have got to be everywhere, enforceable Union Jacks, I mean, it'll annoy people. And I hope it annoys people thoroughly enough that they'll go out and vote SNP.
In fairness, we should mention that when Nicola Sturgeon did her presentations to camera, she invariably had a saltire. If she was speaking from Bute House, and perhaps elsewhere on a few other occasions, there was always a saltire behind her.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
I've watched every single one and I've never
Oh,
even
I'm
noticed
not
them.
talking about the COVID briefings.
Oh, the COVID briefing. Oh,
I'm
oh
not
well,
talking
then
about.
mute
I'm
house
talking.
because that's official and these flags are there all the time.
Yeah.
That they're not just dragged out for the occasion.
Mm.
But I mean, you can't. Could you just imagine if Ian Blackford's busy talking and there's a saltire behind him? Can you imagine the catcalls from what's left of the Tory benches, the half dozen that are actually in the House, and it would be it would be a headline in the Scottish Daily Mail: Blackford disrespecting Parliament by having a saltire in the background. I mean, double standards doesn't even come close to what we're faced. We are actually faced with rampant hypocrisy, rampant bullying, rampant lying. Not lying was what I said. And we have to admit that that's one of the things we have to remember. We are dealing with an establishment which actually managed to have an empire and run an empire for a number of years. And they did not do that by being nice. They did not do that by being honest. They did not do that by having integrity, except what they said in church. They actually got it and held on to it by rapine, murder, theft, lying, conspiracy, double dealing, and all the rest of it. And they're still there. That establishment thread is still there, and we have to watch. And we have not to let them in.
So let me tax you on what evidently falls out of what you just said, and it leads us on to perhaps a man's a man for all that. How would you feel about the Queen as head of state in an independent Scotland?
I think that's one of these things which should actually be up to the people of Scotland. Personally, I would like to get my telegram when I'm 100 years old from the President of the Scottish Republic. But that's my personal view, and I think it's up to the people of Scotland to decide what they want. Yes, actually, we just had somebody there comment that musicians will have to apply for carnets to go
That's
through
right.
each border. I mean, that is something which we've been working on. We've been trying to, it's like talking to a brick sodding wall. Oh God, I'm swearing again. Oh, it really is. It's difficult because they don't understand. I have Fiona Hislop has grasped the situation. She's been actually good. I mean, the Scottish Government have given quite a lot of support to our artists and musicians this year. They've done the best that they can, I think. And they've actually tried to get special, privileges for artists to get to do their work. I mean,
Well, I mean, it is as you describe, and probably even more grievous than that, because my understanding was that the UK government was offered a deal by the EU and then turned it down, which is, if that's true, then that is scandalous, frankly. And I can't imagine how any entertainer would be supportive of an administration that treated them that way. But you never can tell. Sometimes
no, and that is, I believe that is actually the truth, and the reason that appears to be, and I wouldn't like to swear on this, but the reason it appears to be that they really were not terribly happy about allowing EU artists and musicians in on the same terms. They actually wanted privilege, and they weren't prepared to pay for the privilege. So I don't blame the EU at all on this. They made an offer which was, I think, a genuine offer, which would have helped considerably. And as they've ruined the careers of so many, particularly young musicians, because Europe was a very good place for it.
Well, your fan club is in full voice. Melanie McCain says, "Can we have Sheena back sometime, John? She's a hoot."
Thank you very much, Melanie. That's most kind.
And you haven't sung yet.
And I haven't even sung. My God, yeah.
But yeah, this would be a good time. We've only got 5 minutes to go, Sheena.
Okay.
So if you're in good voice,
Hope so.
Could you
Hang
give
on,
us
I'll have a wee drink of water.
well, I'll have one as well, so Jim.
And it is water, by the way. I never drink when I'm working. No,
Me
no
too.
alcohol. Okay.
Lovely. Whenever you're ready.
There for honest poverty that hangs his head, and all that the coward slave we pass him by, we dare be pale for all that, and all that, our toils obscure, and all that. The rank is but the guinea stamp, the man's the gold for all that. Would on himly fare we dine, we're hard and grey and all that. Gie fools their silks and knaves their wine, a man's a man for all that. For all that and all that, their tinsel show and all that. The honest man, though e'er sae pair, is king o' men for all that. Ye see yon birkie ca'd a lord, was struts and stairs and all that. Though hundreds worship at his word, he's but a coof for all that. For all that and all that, his ribbon star and all that. The man o' independent mind, he looks and laughs at all that. A prince can mak a belted knight, a marquis duke, and all that. But an honest man's in his might, get faith he manna for that. For all that and all that, their dignities and all that, the pathos and pride o' worth are higher rank than all that. Then let us pray that come it may, as come it will, for all that, that sense and worth out o' the earth shall bear the gree and all that. For all that and all that, it's coming yet for all that, that man to man the world o'er shall brothers be for all that.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Thank you.
I suspect my clapping has been echoed all over. You know, this show goes out to people across the world, and I suspect they'll be enjoying it as much as everyone here did at home. Fantastic. I'm so very grateful to you, Sheena, for doing that.
It was John. It's been great. I've enjoyed it. And just
wonderful.
Everybody, get the vote out.
There you are.
Get the young vote out. Get the young vote.
Folks, if you like Sheena's a man's a man for all that, honour her by getting out there, getting the vote out, making sure that we're in a position to move ahead to independence on May the 6th. A big thank you, obviously, to Sheena. I think this was a standout show tonight. Thanks so much to you. I very much appreciate it. Just a few things to tell you about for next week. Next week we have Professor Alan Kennedy, who will be our guest. So He'll be talking about Scottish history and so much else besides. So join us next Wednesday at 7 p.m. To hear from Professor Alan Kennedy. And also please look out for Dr. Elliot Bulmer's Constitution column in the Sunday National at the weekend. Go to the supplement, the 7 days supplement. Elliot always has something important and useful to say about constitutions. He's an absolute goldmine of information. And we will soon be, if people read his columns, we'll soon be the best versed country in the world when it comes to constitutions once we get one of our own, which hopefully will happen sooner rather than later. And again, everyone, thank you for joining us this evening. A big thank you again to Sheena, and I look forward to seeing you next week. And remember, it's been a great day for British democracy. Good night, everyone. Take care. Stay safe.
Good night.